I was the one who taught my son-in-law how to shake hands. That probably sounds like a small thing. But when he first started coming around, when my daughter first brought him home for Sunday dinner, I noticed he had a weak handshake. Limp. The kind that makes you wonder about a man. So I pulled him aside after dinner one evening, out on the back porch, and I showed him. Firm grip. Eye contact. One pump, maybe two. He laughed, a little embarrassed. But after that, every time he greeted me, he did it right. I took that as a sign that he was teachable, that he respected me. I tell you that because I want you to understand where my head was when all of this started. I trusted this man. I had reasons to trust him. You don't question someone you helped shape. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I'm 63 years old, retired from 31 years at the County Water Authority, and I live alone in a split-level house in Greensboro, North Carolina, that I've owned outright since 2019. My wife passed 4 years ago, my daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, not because I'm hiding her name. Married a man I'll call my son-in-law, and they live about 40 minutes north of me with my 2 grandchildren. I was not a lonely man. I want to be clear about that. I had my routines. I had my neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named Clifton, who I've known for 11 years. I had my Tuesday morning breakfast group at a diner called the Sunrise Grill on Battleground Avenue, 4 of us, same booth for 8 years. I had my garden. I had my late wife's cat, who I inherited along with everything else, and who I've come to genuinely like despite never considering myself a cat person. The point is, I was not the kind of man who could be confused or overwhelmed or taken advantage of without someone noticing. I thought. It started last Father's Day. My daughter called 2 days before and said my son-in-law wanted to give me something special this year, something practical. I told her I didn't need anything. She said he'd already bought it and he was excited. So the Sunday before Father's Day, they drove down with the grandkids and he carried in a box. A home security system. A good brand, one of the well-known ones. Cameras for the front door, the back porch, one for the garage, a hub device that connects everything, an app on your phone. I worry about you being out here by yourself, Dad, my son-in-law said. He called me Dad. He'd been doing that for 3 years, and I liked it. I thanked him. He spent about 2 hours setting everything up while my daughter helped the kids in the backyard and I watched mostly. He explained what each camera covered, showed me the app, showed me how to see the live feed. He set up the account using my email address, which I gave him, and created a password for me, which he wrote down on a notepad and left on my kitchen counter. I installed the app on my phone. I could see my front porch, my back porch, my garage door. Clear picture, even in the dark. I felt, genuinely, looked after. That was June. By August, I had mostly stopped thinking about the system. I checked the app occasionally, usually after I heard something outside at night, which in my neighborhood was almost always a raccoon or a car backfiring. The cameras did their job quietly, and I did mine. Clifton came over the second Saturday in August to help me fix a section of fence between our properties that had started leaning after the rain. We'd been out there for about an hour when he came inside to wash up and noticed the hub device on my hallway shelf. It was a small white box, about the size of a thick paperback book, with a ring of light around the edge that pulsed blue. He stood there looking at it. I said, "Security system." My son-in-law set it up for Father's Day. Clifton didn't say anything right away. He used to work in telecommunications before the post office. Spent 6 years doing installation and repair work for a regional cable company. He knows equipment. He picked up the hub, turned it over, looked at the ports on the back. "You use this much?" he asked. "Check it sometimes," I said. "It's connected to cameras outside. You set up the account yourself." My son-in-law set it up, I just use the app." He set the device back down. He didn't say the thing I would later find out he was thinking. Instead, he said, "Did he give you all the login information?" I pointed at the notepad on the counter. He looked at it. Then he looked back at the hub. "You mind if I look at something?" he said. I told him to go ahead. He got on his phone and pulled up a browser. He typed in an address, handed me his phone, and asked me to log in using the credentials on the notepad. I did. What came up was the device management page for the hub. It showed the account information, the connected cameras, the network settings, and it showed under administrative access 2 users. My email address was listed, and a second email address I did not recognize. I looked at Clifton. "That's not yours," he said. "I don't know whose that is." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the central air cycling on. Outside, a car went slowly past. "The person with admin access to this system," Clifton said carefully, "can see everything your cameras see. In real time. They can also access stored footage, adjust settings, add or remove cameras, and depending on the device and subscription level, they can access activity logs." "Activity logs," I said. "What time you come and go? When motion is detected and where? Patterns." I sat down, not because I was dizzy or emotional. I sat down because I needed to think with my body still. "Could be a default second account," I said. "Technical support or something." Clifton shook his head slowly. "I've seen that. That's not what this looks like." I asked him what it looked like. He said, "It looks like someone who knows the system set up a secondary admin account for themselves before they handed it over." I did not call my son-in-law that day. I didn't say anything to my daughter. I went back outside with Clifton and we finished the fence. We talked about other things. When he left, I sat on my back porch until it got dark. That night I didn't sleep much. I kept running the same thought around. Maybe there's an explanation. There usually is. People make mistakes with technology. Maybe he set up his own account to monitor the system and forgot to mention it. Maybe it was some kind of family sharing feature. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. But I kept coming back to one thing. He wrote down my credentials on that notepad and left them for me. If he'd forgotten to mention his own account, why didn't he just mention it? Why was my password written on paper on my counter, but there was a whole second account with full admin rights that I knew nothing about? I called Clifton the next morning. I asked him if he knew anyone who could help me get more information without disturbing the system, without tipping anyone off. He said he had a former colleague, a woman named Paula, who now worked in IT security for a healthcare company. He said she owed him a favor and she was discreet. Paula came by on a Wednesday evening after work. She was thorough and quiet and efficient. She spent about 45 minutes on her laptop connected to the hub through the app interface. She didn't touch the physical device, didn't change any settings, didn't log into anything as me. She was just observing. When she was done, she made herself a glass of water from my kitchen tap, sat across from me at the table, and told me what she'd found. The secondary account had been active, regularly. The most recent access had been 4 days ago, at 2 in the morning. 2 in the morning. She showed me a log. It was all timestamps and technical notation that I couldn't fully read, but she walked me through it. Someone had been accessing the camera feeds on a schedule, not constantly. That would have been too obvious and too costly on storage, but at consistent intervals. Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings, early hours when I would certainly be home and certainly be asleep. She also found something I hadn't known was possible. This particular hub model, at the subscription tier it had been set up on, which, she told me, was not the basic tier, had a feature called Enhanced Home Monitoring. It used the internal microphone on the hub device itself, the one in the hallway, to detect what the manufacturer called anomalous sound events. The idea was to alert homeowners to glass breaking, smoke alarms, raised voices. The data from that microphone was logged, not audio recordings technically. Event logs and sound pattern data. But it was data. Paula said this up paid for the enhanced subscription. It's billed annually. Did you set that up? I said I had not. She said the billing is connected to a credit card. It's not yours. Someone else was paying for the premium monitoring of my home. Someone else's credit card was funding a system that watched me sleep and logged the sounds in my hallway. I asked Paula what she recommended. She said, don't touch the system yet. Document everything first, then decide how you want to handle it. I asked her why not just disconnect it. She said, because right now they don't know you know. That's information. Don't give that up until you've figured out what you want to do with it. She was right. I knew she was right. But sitting with that knowledge that someone was watching my house in the dark and didn't know I knew, that was one of the harder things I've done in 63 years. I called my daughter the next Saturday. I kept it casual, asked about the grandkids, asked about her week, asked how my son-in-law was doing. He was fine, she said, busy. His company was in the middle of some kind of restructuring. I asked carefully how things were going financially. She said fine. I asked if they needed anything. She said no. Why would you ask that? I said I just wanted to check. She laughed it off. But I noticed she changed the subject. I had a buddy from my working years, a man named Russell, who retired from the sheriff's department 3 years before I did from the water authority. We'd stayed close. We met for lunch every few weeks at a barbecue place on High Point Road. I called him and asked if we could move up our lunch. I laid it all out for him over pulled pork and cornbread. He listened. He asked a few questions. When I was done, he wiped his mouth and leaned back. You have a copy of the access logs, he said. Paula had given me a PDF. He said, you know anyone at that second email address domain? I looked at the email. It was a Gmail account with a name that meant nothing to me. Not my son-in-law's name. Not any name I recognized. Just a random-looking string of letters and numbers. Russell said, could be a second account he created just for this. I said I'd thought the same thing. He told me he still had contacts. He wasn't going to do anything official, and he wasn't going to advise me to do anything that could complicate things legally. But he could make a call. Find out if there was anything else going on that I should know about. 3 days later, he called me back. His voice was careful, the way it gets when he's about to say something that matters. He said there had been a civil matter filed in Guilford County about 5 weeks ago. A dispute over a financial instrument. He used that phrase specifically. He said it involved a trust, and it involved my name. I didn't know about any trust dispute. I called an attorney that Friday, a woman who had handled my wife's estate and who I trusted. I drove to her office on Elm Street and I brought the PDF from Paula and the account login information and everything I had written down over the previous weeks. She listened for a long time. Then she explained some things to me. My wife, when she passed, had left a small portion of her estate in a trust that was structured to pass to our daughter upon certain conditions. One of those conditions involved my continued residence in the family home, not because anyone intended it that way exactly, but because of how the language had been drafted. My wife's attorney at the time had been overly thorough and not quite careful enough, and a clause had been written in that complicated things if the primary property changed hands, or if there was evidence of diminished capacity. Diminished capacity. My attorney paused when she said those words. She said, I want to ask you something directly. Have you noticed anything in the past few months? Phone calls, conversations, visits, where someone seemed to be suggesting you were confused or struggling? I thought about it. My son-in-law, about 6 weeks back, had called me on a Tuesday afternoon. In the middle of our conversation, he'd mentioned casually that he'd been worried about me. Said my daughter had mentioned I'd seemed a little forgetful lately. I hadn't thought much of it. I told him I was fine. He said he was sure I was, he just wanted to check. My daughter had also mentioned at a family dinner that she'd noticed I'd left the garage door open one evening. I had. I forgot. It happened once. These small things individually had not alarmed me. I hadn't assembled them. My attorney assembled them. She said the camera footage, the sound monitoring, the access logs. If someone had been watching my patterns, documenting anything that could be framed as confusion or decline, and simultaneously positioning themselves in a civil matter involving my residence and the trust, that was a pattern worth taking seriously. She made a call that afternoon to the attorney handling the civil matter. There had indeed been a preliminary filing. It hadn't been formally served to me yet, which was why I hadn't known. My son-in-law had initiated it. I drove home. Same route I always take, down Wendover to Battleground, left on my street. Same trees, same neighbors' houses. I don't remember what was on the radio. I remember stopping at the red light at the corner and thinking about that first Sunday dinner, when he came home with my daughter and shook my hand the way I taught him. I had 3 weeks before anything had to happen legally. My attorney advised me to say nothing to my daughter or my son-in-law during that time. She had steps she wanted to take first. What I did in those 3 weeks, I called my doctor and scheduled a full cognitive evaluation, not because I doubted myself, because I wanted documentation. I wanted a physician on record stating what my condition was and had been. The evaluation took about 2 hours. I scored, my doctor told me, in the range expected for a healthy 63-year-old with no indicators of decline. She gave me a written summary. I also quietly, with Paula's help, backed up the access logs and camera data to a secure location that was entirely mine. We did not disturb the system. We just made sure I had copies of everything. And I had one conversation with my daughter. This was the one I had been dreading more than anything, because whatever her husband had done, she was my child, and I did not know, and still do not know for certain, how much she knew. I took her to lunch, just the two of us, a Saturday, a quiet Italian place in Fisher Park where we'd gone many times over the years. I waited until we'd ordered, until the bread was on the table, until it felt as normal as I could make it. Then I told her about the camera system, about the second admin account, about Paula's findings, about the timestamps at 2 a.m. I told her about the trust, the civil filing, the attorney's call. I laid it out the same way I had laid it out for Russell, just the facts in order, without interpretation. She went very still. The bread sat between us. She said, I didn't know about the filing. I believed her. I looked at my daughter, who I have known for 37 years, and I believed her. She said, I need to make a phone call. I said, take your time. She stepped outside. She was gone for about 15 minutes. When she came back, her eyes were red. She sat down and she said, he told me it was a protective measure. For the grandkids. For the future. He said it was about making sure the estate was handled correctly. I said, he was watching my house at 2 a.m. She closed her eyes. We sat there for a while without talking. Outside, a couple walked past the window with a dog. The restaurant was quiet enough that we could hear the kitchen. What happened after that is between my daughter and her husband, and I won't put it in this story. What I'll say is that the civil filing was withdrawn within 10 days of my attorney's response. The secondary admin account was removed from the system. My son-in-law has not been to my house since. My daughter and I talk on the phone 3 times a week now. More than before. When she brings the grandkids, it's just her. We don't talk about him much. There will come a time when we have to, but that time isn't yet. Clifton came by last weekend. We sat on the back porch and I made coffee and we watched the birds at the feeder my wife planted near the fence. He asked me how I was doing. I said I was all right. He nodded. After a while he said, "You know what gets me?" He set up that system thinking it would make him smarter than you, but all it did was leave a paper trail. I said he didn't count on the fence. Clifton looked at me. "If that section hadn't started leaning," I said, "you never would have come inside. Never would have seen the hub." He thought about that. Then he said, "Well, I'm glad it rained. I've been sitting with this story for a few months now, trying to understand what I actually want to say about it, because it would be easy to make it about betrayal. About a man who smiled at my table and shook my hand the way I taught him, and was quietly building something against me. And it is about that. I'm not pretending it isn't. But it's also about something else, something I've been thinking about since that evening when Paula showed me the access logs. 2 in the morning, a Wednesday, while I was in my bedroom down the hall. The system was sold as care, sold as a Father's Day gift from a man who worried about me being alone. And that's the part that stays with me longer than the anger does. Not that someone tried to use technology against me. That's a crime, and crimes can be addressed. What stays with me is how completely something can look like love and not be it. How the same action, setting up cameras in someone's home, watching over them at night, can mean such entirely different things depending on who's doing it and why. My wife used to check on me when I was sick. She'd come to the doorway in the middle of the night and just listen to make sure I was breathing normally. I only know she did this because she told me once, years later. She thought it would embarrass me if I'd known. She was probably right. That's what it looks like when someone watches over you because they love you. You know the other kind when you see the access logs. Take care of your home. Know what's in it and who has the keys. The real keys and the digital ones, and pay attention to the people who seem very eager to make sure you're comfortable and taken care of. Most of them mean it. A few of them are counting on you to believe they mean it. I was the careful one. And even I almost missed it. I've told this story a few times now. To Russell over lunch. To my attorney. Once to my doctor, the morning of the evaluation, when she asked me why I wanted the assessment done. I told her the short version. She listened and then she said, "Good, you came in on your own. That matters." That's the thing I keep returning to. Not the betrayal itself, though that's there, and I won't pretend it fades quickly. What I keep returning to is the question of how it almost worked. It almost worked because it was patient. Whatever my son-in-law intended, he didn't rush it. He set up the system in June, and the civil filing didn't happen until nearly 5 months later. He let time do part of the work. He let me get comfortable. He let me start to feel looked after. And if Clifton hadn't come inside to wash his hands that August afternoon, if that section of fence hadn't leaned after the rain, I might still be comfortable right now, still feeling looked after, still not knowing. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, that there are outcomes in your life that depend on a rainstorm and a fence post. But here's what I've come to understand about it. The plan had a flaw built into it from the beginning. And the flaw was that it required me to stay exactly as I was, unaware, comfortable, isolated in my routines. The moment I started asking questions, the moment Clifton stood there looking at that hub, and I leaned in instead of waving it off, the whole structure started to come apart. Not because I'm exceptional, because I paid attention, because I didn't decide the answer before I'd looked at the evidence. That's what I'd call intelligence, but not the kind that comes from a test score. It's the kind that comes from staying curious about your own life. From not assuming that because something looks familiar, you fully understand it. I'd lived with that security system for 2 months and thought I knew what it was. I didn't know what it was. Clifton asked one question and I found out I didn't know. There's a cost to that kind of attention. It means you have to be willing to find out things you don't want to know, And that takes a different kind of strength than physical strength. The strength to sit on your back porch until it gets dark and not make a phone call yet, because you're not ready, and because readiness matters. The strength to take your daughter to lunch and lay out the facts without breaking down, because she needed to hear them clearly, and so did you. What I think about my son-in-law now, and I've thought about it a lot, is that what he did had a logic to it. A cold one, but a logic. And the logic depended entirely on me being less than I am. On me being the version of a 63-year-old man who doesn't ask questions, who doesn't have friends who know things, who doesn't call an attorney when something doesn't add up. He handed me that gift and he'd already decided what kind of man I was. He was wrong. And that wrongness is what caught him. What you build your life on eventually shows up in the outcomes you get. He built on assumption and concealment, and it collapsed the moment someone shone a light on it. I built on 31 years of showing up, on friendships that go back decades, on knowing how to be still and think before I act. And that held. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound like more than I am. I'm 63. I live alone, and I missed this for 2 months, but I didn't miss it forever. And when it mattered, I knew what to do with what I found. That's enough. That has to be enough.